My name is Camila Morgan, and I'm 28 years old. I live in Seattle working as a graphic designer, and for most of my adult life I believed I had things figured out. I was the reliable one in the family, the planner, the organizer, the person who always thought things through before making a move. If there was a list to be written, I wrote it. If there was a schedule to be followed, I kept it. Welcome to Revenge Amy channel. Your support is what keeps us going and allows us to continue telling inspiring stories of justice, healing, and self-worth. Help our channel reach our first 1,000 subscribers by liking and subscribing. Now let's get back to the story. My younger sister, Riley, was the exact opposite. She's 3 years younger, and while I was staying up late studying design, she was drifting from job to job, chasing adventure, and living for the moment. Where I found comfort in routine, Riley thrived on spontaneity. Still, despite our differences, we had always been close. When our parents retired to Florida, Riley and I were left to build our own lives in the Pacific Northwest. I settled into a modest one-bedroom apartment downtown. Riley fell head over heels for Logan, a charming guy who claimed to work in real estate. Just 6 months into dating, they moved into a luxury high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble counters, and a rooftop pool that looked like something out of a magazine. The only problem? Neither Riley nor Logan had the kind of jobs that would explain that lifestyle. When I cautiously asked Riley how they managed it, she brushed me off, saying Logan had family money. I didn't press her further, though I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't quite right. 3 years later, the illusion collapsed. One night around 2 in the morning, Riley called me in tears. She discovered messages from another woman on Logan's phone. Intimate messages that proved he'd been cheating for months. When she confronted him, he didn't even bother to deny it. He told her she could accept it or leave. So she left. Riley showed up at my door with 2 hastily packed suitcases, mascara smeared down her face. As her older sister, I couldn't turn her away. I pulled out the couch bed, wrapped her in a blanket, and told her she could stay as long as she needed. What started as days stretched into weeks. My one-bedroom apartment was far too small for both of us, but I didn't have the heart to tell her to go when she looked so broken. Eventually, I suggested we find a 2-bedroom place together. My lease was ending soon anyway, and combining our resources might give us more space. Riley loved the idea. She dove into listings, focusing on neighborhoods I could barely afford. When I reminded her of my budget, she became oddly secretive about money. She claimed she had more savings than I realized, and that Logan had given her a settlement. When they split up, it took weeks of searching, but we finally landed on a reasonably priced 2-bedroom in Queen and not far from my office. It wasn't nearly as lavish as Riley's old place with Logan, but it was modern, had in-unit laundry, and even a small balcony with a partial view of the Space Needle. We signed the lease and set a move-in date. That's when Riley's behavior began to shift. She dodged conversations about logistics, packing, furniture, budgeting, and I often caught her on hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. Once I came home early and found her browsing expensive jewelry online. It didn't make sense with her supposed financial situation, but I convinced myself it was just retail therapy, a distraction from her breakup. 2 weeks before our move, I had to travel to Portland for an important client presentation. I'd been preparing for weeks, and Riley had even helped me rehearse. On the morning I left, she hugged me tightly and told me to crush it. She promised she'd use the time to start packing. But just hours after arriving in Portland, the client canceled the meeting due to a sudden company acquisition. My boss told me to take the rest of the week off as a reward for all the prep work. Disappointed but secretly relieved, I decided to head back home early. I picked up Thai food from our favorite restaurant as a consolation prize and hopped on the afternoon train back to Seattle. By the time I walked up the stairs to our apartment, I was looking forward to surprising Riley and maybe using the free time to start packing together. But as I approached the door, I froze. Voices drifted from inside. Male voices I didn't recognize. At first I thought Riley had invited friends over, maybe to help with boxes. But there was something about the tone of their conversation, low, secretive, that made me pause. With my hand on the doorknob, I slipped the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed open the door. The voices went silent instantly. Riley, I called, setting the takeout on the entry table. I'm home early. The presentation got cancelled. No answer. Just whispers that quickly died out. My chest tightened as I walked deeper inside. And then I saw them point. 3 men stood in my bedroom. One was kneeling by my closet, another had my dresser drawers yanked out, and the third was running his hands along my window frame. My room was a disaster. Clothes scattered across the floor, the closet half emptied, even a couple of floorboards pried up in the corner. They all turned to look at me, startled like kids caught stealing candy. Before I could speak, Riley burst into the room, her face flushed, eyes wide with panic. "Camila, you're home," she squeaked. "What are you doing here?" "The meeting was cancelled," I repeated, slowly scanning the wreckage. "Who are these people, and why are they tearing up my bedroom?" Riley gave a strained laugh. "Oh my gosh, I should have called you. These guys are contractors, Mr. Davis, Paul, and Rick. They're just checking things out for renovations before we move into the new place." She gestured at the men, but none of them so much as nodded or smiled that I looked around in disbelief. "In this apartment? That doesn't make any sense." She rushed into a flimsy explanation about the landlord giving us a deal on renovations at the new place, and how they needed to match the closet layout. None of it added up. The men didn't have tool belts or uniforms, just a few random tools shoved into their pockets. One of them reeked of cologne, not sweat or sawdust. "Show me the paperwork," I demanded, holding out my hand. "The agreement with the landlord." Riley's smile faltered. "It's all electronic. I'll forward you the emails later tonight." Then she turned to the men quickly. "I think we're good here, guys. Thanks for coming." They shuffled out without a word, carrying not measuring tapes or blueprints but what looked like some kind of scanner. As they passed, one bumped into my shoulder without even apologizing. When the door clicked shut behind them, I turned to Riley. "What is really going on here?" Her voice hardened. "I told you they were doing pre-renovation checks. You're always so suspicious, Camila. Can't you just trust me for once?" But as I stared at the wreckage of my bedroom, every instinct in me screamed. Something was terribly wrong. That night, Riley insisted we go out for dinner. She claimed it was to celebrate my early return, but it felt more like a distraction, a way to keep me from asking questions about what I had just walked in on. We sat at one of our favorite Italian restaurants, but the usual comfort wasn't there. Riley scrolled on her phone constantly, typing out quick messages before flipping the screen face down, as if she didn't want me to see. Every buzz made her glance nervously before offering another tight smile. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Who keeps texting you?" I asked, setting my fork down. "Just friends," she said casually, a little too quickly. "We're making weekend plans." I studied her face. Friends? Or one of those guys from earlier? Paul, Rick, whoever they were. Her expression hardened for just a second. Then she forced a laugh. "Of course not. You're overthinking it. Honestly, Camila, why are you interrogating me? You always jump to the worst conclusions." "Interrogating?" I shook my head. "I walked into my bedroom and found strangers tearing it apart. You didn't call me, you didn't warn me. And your explanation didn't make any sense." "You're paranoid," she snapped, tossing her napkin onto the table. "You never just trust me." I bit back, the anger rising in my throat. I wanted to press her, but she kept changing the subject, asking me pointed questions about my canceled presentation. When exactly had I found out? What time did I decide to come back? Was my boss expecting me to go into the office tomorrow? The way she drilled down on every detail made it feel less like small talk and more like she was calculating something. The rest of the meal dragged on in strained silence. By the time we got home, Riley claimed she had a splitting headache and shut herself in her room without another word. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to those men in my room, their hands rifling through my belongings. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep entirely and started cleaning up the mess. That's when I noticed the subtle changes. My jewelry box, usually on the right side of my dresser, was now slightly to the left. My laptop, which I had left open, was closed. A photo of Riley and me as kids that had always sat straight on my nightstand was tilted at an odd angle. They hadn't just torn up the floorboards, they had been looking through my things. My heart raced as I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I typed Seattle Home Improvements into the search bar. Nothing. No company by that name in the area. I tried Seattle Home Improvement, Seattle Renovations, Seattle Remodeling. Still nothing. For a company Riley claimed did a lot of work with property managers, it had no online footprint at all. I left my laptop open and walked into the kitchen. Riley had left some of her mail scattered on the counter. I sifted through it quietly, my ears tuned to the sound of her breathing behind her closed bedroom door. Among the envelopes was a welcome letter from the property management company of our new building. At the bottom was a customer service number. I saved it in my phone. Tomorrow, I would call and find out if anything Riley told me was real. But my unease only deepened. Acting on instinct, I unzipped Riley's purse, which she had dropped carelessly by the entryway. My fingers trembled as I searched through the inner pocket. Inside I found a flat key. Not a house key or car key, but something that looked like it belonged to a lockbox or storage unit. Alongside it was a business card. Secure Storage Solutions. An address across town was printed on the bottom. I froze. Riley had never mentioned a storage unit. Why would she need one when she'd brought all her belongings with her after leaving Logan? I carefully put everything back exactly as I had found it and zipped the purse shut again. Back in my room, sleep was still impossible. My mind raced as I pieced things together. Riley's sudden cash deposits into our moving fund, her expensive new clothes she swore were bought on sale, the whispered phone calls on the fire escape. At the time, I'd brushed them off as coping mechanisms, maybe even conversations with Logan. But now, they felt like evidence. Finally, I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Daniela, a real estate agent I trusted. Hey, quick question. Is it normal for landlords to send contractors into your current apartment to prep renovations for a new one? Like pulling up floorboards, checking closets? Riley says it's a move-in bonus, but it feels wrong. It was after 1 in the morning. I didn't expect a reply, but within minutes, Daniela texted back. Camila, that's not just unusual, it's completely unheard of. Renovations like that require formal contracts and tenant approval, and they would never involve someone's current apartment. What's going on? Are you safe? My stomach dropped. I'm okay. I just needed to confirm. Can you look into the property management company for me tomorrow? Of course, she replied quickly. But please be careful. Something's not right here. I set my phone on the nightstand and stared out the window at the glowing city. Every instinct screamed that I was in the middle of something I didn't understand. Was Riley scamming the new landlord? Were those men even contractors at all? Or was this something darker? It was after 3 a.m. before exhaustion finally pulled me under. The pounding on our front door jolted me awake just a few hours later. The sound was harsh, insistent, the kind of knocking that couldn't be ignored. Camila! Camila, wake up! Riley's panicked voice echoed down the hall. I stumbled out of bed, pulling on a robe as I rushed toward her. She stood in the hallway, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. There are police officers at the door, she whispered, her voice trembling. Another series of heavy knocks made the walls shake. I moved past her, my heart thudding as I pressed my eye to the peephole. 2 officers stood outside. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and a younger woman with a no-nonsense bun. The man held up a folded document in one hand. I opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? Seattle Police Department, the man said, flashing his badge. I'm Officer Ramirez. This is Officer Chun. We have a search warrant for this apartment. Are you Camila Morgan? Yes, I answered, my mouth suddenly dry. And is Riley Morgan present? Officer Chun asked, glancing past me into the hallway. That's my sister, I said, turning toward Riley, who was frozen in place. She's here. What's this about? Before the officers could answer, Riley's voice rang out, sharp and trembling. Camila, what did you do? Did you call them? How could you do this to me? I spun around, stunned. What? I didn't call anyone. I don't even know why they're here. But as the officers stepped inside, The truth began to unfold, and I realized the nightmare was only just beginning. The officers stepped inside with an air of authority that left no room for argument. Officer Ramirez's tone was firm as he explained, "We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with a series of high-end burglaries in the Capitol Hill and Queen Anne neighborhoods. We'll need both of you to remain in the living room while we conduct the search." "Be burglaries?" I stammered, stunned. I turned toward Riley, expecting to see shock mirroring my own, but her face went bone white. Her eyes darted nervously toward her bedroom door before she crossed her arms in defiance. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We haven't done anything wrong. You can't just come in here and accuse us." "We're not accusing anyone yet," Officer Chun replied calmly, though her gaze was sharp. "This is an active investigation. Please sit down while we do our job." My knees felt weak and I sank onto the couch. Riley hesitated before perching on the edge of the armchair, her posture stiff, her jaw tight. Officer Ramirez stood near us, keeping a close eye, while Officer Chun headed straight toward Riley's room. The silence was suffocating. I could hear drawers opening, hangers scraping, and the shuffle of boxes being moved. My stomach twisted with every sound. Officer Ramirez looked at me. "Miss Morgan, Camila, how long have you and your sister been living here together?" "About 6 weeks," I answered automatically, my voice small. "She was living with her boyfriend before that, but they broke up." "And what do you know about her activities or friends during this time?" "Not much," I admitted. Saying it aloud made me realize just how little I really knew about Riley's daily life. "She's been looking for a job, helping me plan our move to a new apartment. I work full-time, so I'm not home much during the day." "Have you noticed anything unusual? Visitors, sudden new possessions, changes in behavior?" Before I could answer, Officer Chen's voice rang out from Riley's room. "Ramirez, you need to see this." He excused himself and walked down the hall. I turned toward my sister, my voice shaking. "Riley, what is going on? What have you done?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "You wouldn't understand," she whispered bitterly. "You've always had everything figured out. Perfect Camila, with her perfect job and perfect life." My heart dropped. "What are you talking about? My life isn't perfect. I've worked hard for everything I have. Some of us don't want to scrape by forever," she hissed. Her eyes finally lifted to mine, filled with a resentment I had never seen before. "Some of us aren't content settling for less." Before I could respond, Officer Ramirez returned, his face grim. Officer Chen followed, carrying a small lockbox. She set it down on the coffee table in front of us and opened it. Inside were several watches and pieces of jewelry, shiny, expensive, and completely out of place in our modest apartment. I knew instantly neither of us could ever have afforded them. "Riley Morgan," Officer Ramirez said formally, "please stand up." Riley shook her head violently, her composure cracking. "No, this isn't mine." "You can't? Stand up, please," he repeated. Tears welled in her eyes as she rose shakily to her feet. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The words seemed to slice the air. I sat frozen as he pulled out handcuffs and secured them around her wrists. He began reciting her rights in a steady, practiced voice. Riley broke down, sobbing and glaring at me all at once. "This is your fault," she cried, her voice raw. "I was only trying to secure our future. You have no idea what I've done, for you, for us." "Ma'am," Officer Chun reminded her sharply, "anything you say can and will be used against you in court. It would be wise to wait for your lawyer." But Riley kept ranting, her words tumbling out in between sobs. "You sit there in your little bubble judging me, but I was the one making sure we could have more. You'll see. You'll thank me someday." As they led her toward the door, I stood rooted in place, my world shattering around me. My sister, the girl I'd grown up protecting, sharing secrets with, believing in, was being taken away in handcuffs to the threshold. She twisted her head back to look at me. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, but her eyes were hard, cold in a way I had never seen. "You've ruined everything," she said quietly, every word sharp and deliberate. "Everything." And then she was gone. The apartment was suddenly silent except for the pounding of my heart. I stared at the open lockbox on the table, its glittering contents mocking me. Officer Chun turned back to me, her tone softer than it had been. "Miss Morgan, we'll need you to come down to the station as well. We have questions about your knowledge of your sister's activities." I blinked, my throat dry. Am I under arrest too?" "No, not at this time," she assured me. "But we do need your statement. You can follow us in your own vehicle if you prefer." I nodded numbly, my mind spinning. I couldn't process what had just happened. Only an hour earlier, I had been half asleep in my bed, clinging to the hope that the oddities I'd noticed were just my imagination. Now my sister was gone, accused of being tied to a string of high-end burglaries. As I stood there in the wreckage of what had once been a safe space, I realized I didn't recognize the woman who had just been taken away. Riley wasn't the sister I thought I knew. She was someone else entirely, a stranger who had been living under the same roof, hiding secrets so dark I could barely comprehend them. The officers waited patiently as I gathered my purse and keys. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped them. When I finally locked the door behind me, the apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene, a trap I'd been lured into without even realizing it. Walking down the hall, following the officers out into the cold Seattle morning, one thought echoed relentlessly in my mind. How had I missed all the signs? The police station was a cold, sterile place. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzing above, linoleum floors that seemed to amplify every footstep, and walls painted in a shade of beige that sucked the life out of everything. An officer led me into a small interview room with a metal table bolted to the floor and two stiff plastic chairs. "Please wait here," he said before shutting the door behind me, so I waited. For more than an hour I sat there, my mind racing, my stomach knotted so tightly it hurt. Every sound from the hallway made me flinch. I kept replaying the image of Riley being led away in handcuffs, her tear-streaked face twisted in anger, blaming me as if I had somehow orchestrated it all. Finally, the door opened. A man walked in carrying a thick folder and a cup of coffee. He looked to be in his 50s, with tired eyes but a kind expression. He set the folder down and took the seat across from me. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice steady. "I'm Detective Marshall. I'm handling the case involving your sister." I swallowed hard. What is going on? I don't understand any of this. Riley isn't. She's not a criminal. He gave me a sympathetic look but didn't soften his words. "I'm afraid the evidence says otherwise. And what I'm about to tell you may be difficult to hear, but it's important that you understand. We believe you're an innocent party in all this, and your cooperation could be very helpful." He opened the folder and began laying out photographs. My breath caught in my throat. They were surveillance images, grainy but clear enough to recognize faces. There was Riley, my sister, entering upscale apartment buildings. Sometimes she was alone. Other times she was with Logan. Detective Marshall pointed to one photo in particular. This was taken at a building in Capitol Hill. Your sister and Logan were observed entering late at night and leaving with bags less than an hour later. The tenants reported several pieces of jewelry and electronics missing the next morning. I shook my head in disbelief. But Riley told me she and Logan broke up. She said she caught him cheating. That's why she came to live with me. That was a cover story, the detective said firmly. 2 weeks ago, Logan was arrested for driving under the influence. When officers impounded his car, they found stolen property in the trunk. Jewelry, watches, handbags, items linked to recent burglaries. He's been cooperating with us since then, in exchange for a reduced sentence. Through his testimony and the evidence, we connected your sister to the burglary ring. The room tilted for a moment, and I had to grip the edge of the table. So there was no breakup. She lied. Detective Marshall nodded. According to Logan, they staged the breakup after his arrest. They were worried we were closing in and needed a new base of operations. Your apartment provided that cover. The realization slammed into me like a physical blow. She hadn't come to me broken-hearted. She had come to me with a plan. I forced the words out, my voice breaking. She used me. I'm afraid so, he said gently. The new apartment you were planning to move into was going to be their next target. Somehow your sister obtained keys to the unit. The plan was to clean it out before the actual tenants moved in, then claim it had been broken into before your move-in date. I thought back to those so-called contractors in my room, pulling up floorboards and rummaging through my closet. My stomach turned. They weren't contractors at all, I whispered. No, Marshall confirmed. Those were her new associates. With Logan in custody, she needed new partners. We believe they were using your bedroom to temporarily store stolen goods. That's what they were retrieving when you came home earlier than expected. In my room, I said, my voice hollow. Where I sleep. The detective slid another photo across the table. It was of a storage unit filled with electronics, designer handbags, artwork, and jewelry. On the sign in the background, I recognized the name, Secure Storage Solutions. This was recovered this morning, he said. The unit was rented under your sister's name. The key was found in her possession during booking. I stared at the photograph, my stomach twisting. I remembered finding that business card and strange key in her purse. My gut had told me something was wrong, but I hadn't wanted to believe it. How long? I asked finally, my voice breaking. How long has this been going on? Detective Marshall leaned back, folding his hands. Based on our investigation and Logan's testimony, about 3 years. They met at a club, realized they shared similar interests, and started small, taking jewelry and valuables at parties they attended. It escalated quickly once they realized Riley's job at a high-end cleaning service gave them access to luxury apartments. She could learn layouts, figure out schedules, and identify which tenants were out of town. Logan handled the entries and the resale of stolen goods. It was a well-oiled operation. 3 years. The entire time she was with Logan. While I believed she was building a life with him, she was actually building a criminal empire. My voice cracked. I never knew. I never had a clue. You wouldn't have, Marshall said. They were careful. And you were exactly the kind of cover Riley needed. Someone stable, responsible, someone no one would suspect. I pressed my hands to my face, tears leaking through my fingers. The betrayal cut so deep it made it hard to breathe. Marshall's tone softened. We don't believe you were involved, Camila, but we do need your full cooperation. Anything you can tell us, her contacts, unusual behaviors, things you may have noticed, could help us dismantle what's left of this operation. So I told him everything. I talked about the whispered phone calls, the sudden cash deposits, the designer clothes Riley couldn't afford, the suspicious men in my bedroom, the strange key and storage card. Each detail felt like another knife in my chest. Another confirmation that the sister I thought I knew was a stranger. When I finished, Marshall closed the folder and gave me a steady look. You've been incredibly helpful. I know this isn't easy, but your information is important. I nodded numbly, wiping my cheeks. Can I see her? The words slipped out before I could stop them. I need to hear it from her. I need to ask why. Marshall hesitated. She's still being processed. It might be better to wait a few days. Give both of you some time. I need to look her in the eye, I said firmly. I need to hear it from her directly. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll see what I can arrange, but don't expect closure right away. Situations like this, the truth often comes out in layers. As he stood, he added one last piece of advice. Don't go back to your apartment alone tonight. It's a crime scene now and you need support. Do you have someone you can stay with? I thought of Daniela, who had been texting me late into the night, worried about my cryptic messages. Yes, I whispered. I'll stay with a friend. Good, he said. And Camila, remember, none of this is your fault. But as I left the station and stepped into the harsh morning sunlight, those words felt impossible to believe. Because the truth was, I hadn't just lost a sister. I had lost the illusion of who I thought she was. And that illusion had shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to put back together. 5 days passed before I was allowed to see Riley again. 5 days of living out of a suitcase at Daniela's apartment, cooperating with investigators, and trying to piece together how my life had imploded so completely. Our lease for the new apartment had been canceled. My own place was still considered a crime scene, meaning I couldn't return. I'd given my boss a vague explanation about a family emergency to account for my absence from work. And every night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling of Daniela's spare room, I wondered who my sister really was. When I finally walked into the visitors area of the county jail, the reality of it hit me like a cold wave. Everything was gray and lifeless. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, glass partitions dividing families, and guards standing at every corner. When they brought Riley out, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the confident sister who had strutted through life like rules didn't apply to her. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, her face pale without makeup, and the orange jumpsuit she wore seemed to swallow her whole. But when her eyes met mine, I saw it, that defiant spark, the same one she'd had even as they placed handcuffs on her wrists in our apartment. She sat down across from me, the glass between us reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. Finally, Riley broke the silence. "You look terrible," she said flatly. "So do you," I replied. Her lips curved in a humorless smile. "Fair enough. Why did you ask me to come?" I asked, folding my arms tightly. "Why did you?" she countered. "You think you're going to get some neat little explanation tied up in a bow? It doesn't work that way." "I needed answers," I said firmly. "I needed to hear it from you. Detective Marshall told me what you've been doing, but I want to know why. I want to know how you could do this, to strangers, to our family, to me." Riley laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Let me guess. He painted me as the mastermind, right? The evil sister pulling all the strings in some grand burglary ring." "He showed me the photos," I said quietly. "The surveillance footage. You and Logan walking into buildings and walking out with stolen property. The storage unit in your name filled with things that didn't belong to you. He told me Logan has been cooperating with them since his arrest." Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of anger. "That idiot. One mistake, a DUI, and he brought the whole house of cards down. He couldn't keep his mouth shut to save his life." I shook my head, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "So it's true. You never broke up with him. You lied to me. You came to my apartment, acting broken and betrayed, just to use me as a cover." Riley leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "I needed somewhere to regroup. You were perfect for that. Reliable, predictable Camila. Always doing the right thing. Always ready to take me in, no questions asked." Her words cut deep, delivered with an edge that turned my stomach. "You used me," I whispered. "You call it using. I call it surviving." She leaned back in her chair. "Do you know what it's like to finally have money? To live in places people dream about? To wear clothes that make people look at you differently? You were working yourself to death just to pay rent. Meanwhile, I was living. Really living. At the expense of other people," I snapped. "At the expense of the people you stole from. And at the expense of me. You dragged me into this mess without a second thought." Her face hardened. "They had insurance. They didn't miss it. Rich people never do. That's not the point." My voice cracked. "It's about trust, Riley. About decency. You invaded homes, you destroyed people's sense of safety, and then you had the audacity to use your own sister as a pawn." For a moment, her shoulders sagged. "It wasn't supposed to go like this. It started small. Just a bracelet left at a party. A watch someone didn't notice was gone. Logan had connections to move the stuff, no questions asked. We realized how easy it was and we got good at it. 3 years, Camila. 3 years of never getting caught." I stared at her, disbelief mingling with grief. "And Grandma's jewelry? Mom called me months ago, crying because she thought she misplaced it during the move. That was you, wasn't it?" Her eyes slid away from mine, and the silence told me everything I needed to know. "You stole from our own family," I said, my voice trembling. "Those pieces were meant for us, our inheritance, our connection to her. And you sold them like they were nothing." Riley's jaw tightened. "We needed capital to expand. Those pieces were valuable. They were just sitting in a box. I felt physically ill. It wasn't about the jewelry, Riley. It was about trust. And you broke it in the worst way possible. Her eyes flicked back to mine, sharp and calculating. Listen, doesn't have to end like this. The cops don't have everything. They don't know all the dates. If you just give me an alibi for a few nights, say I was with you, they'll believe you. Everyone thinks you're so honest. You could get me out of this. My mouth fell open. You're asking me to lie for you? To commit perjury? After everything you've done? She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. We could split what's left. There's still stuff they haven't found. Enough to set us both up for life. Think about it, Camila. We could walk away from all this. Together. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at her across the glass. For the first time I saw her clearly. Not as my sister, not as the girl I'd grown up with, but as someone twisted by greed and entitlement. Someone who would steal from strangers, from family, and still have the audacity to ask me to cover for her. Slowly I stood. No, Riley. I won't lie for you. I won't be part of this. Her eyes widened, panic breaking through her mask of confidence. So that's it? You're just going to abandon me? What happened to sisters forever? What happened to always having each other's backs? That ended, I said, my voice firm despite the tears in my eyes. When you decided money mattered more than family. When you chose lies and theft over honesty and love. You abandoned me long before today. She pressed her hands to the glass, desperation etched into her features. Family should come first, Camila. Blood should come first. I turned away, tears streaming down my cheeks, but I didn't look back. As I walked toward the exit, her voice rang out behind me, growing more frantic, more furious. You'll regret this. You'll regret turning your back on me. But I kept walking, each step breaking my heart and strengthening my resolve. Because the truth was clear now. The sister I thought I knew didn't exist anymore. 6 months have passed since the day I walked out of the visitor's room, leaving my sister's desperate shouts echoing behind me. Half a year of trying to stitch my life back together from the wreckage she left behind. The weeks that followed Riley's arrest were some of the hardest of my life. With our lease for the new apartment canceled and my old place still tied up as a crime scene, I stayed at Daniela's apartment longer than I'd planned. At first, I felt like a burden dragging my suitcase from room to room, waking up in a space that wasn't mine. But Daniela never once made me feel unwelcome. She cooked for me, gave me privacy when I needed it, and reminded me that having people to lean on didn't make me weak. Slowly I started to regain some normalcy. Work became my anchor. I poured myself into projects, channeling my grief and confusion into design. My clients noticed. What started as survival soon became growth, my little freelance business expanded, and I even took on new corporate accounts. Somehow, in the middle of chaos, my career began to flourish. But emotionally, that was another story. Trust felt like a foreign concept. If my own sister could lie to me so thoroughly, how could I trust colleagues, friends, or even strangers I met at networking events? I second-guessed every interaction, searching for hidden motives, waiting for betrayal that it wasn't sustainable. So, at Daniela's urging, I started therapy. My therapist listened patiently as I poured out everything. Riley's lies, the way she'd used me, the shame I felt for not seeing it sooner. When I admitted I felt like a fool for being so blind, my therapist shook her head gently. You saw what you expected to see, she told me. You expected honesty from your family, which is normal and healthy. Don't punish yourself for giving your sister trust. That says more about her choices than yours. Week by week, session by session, I learned to stop carrying Riley's sins as my own. The hardest part, though, was telling our parents they had moved to Florida 3 years earlier, enjoying retirement, blissfully unaware of the double life Riley had been leading. When I called them after the arrest, they were devastated. Mom cried, her voice breaking as she asked over and over, where did we go wrong? You didn't? I assured her, though inside I was still asking myself the same thing. Riley made her own choices. You couldn't have known. Dad was quieter, his grief showing in subtle ways. Long silences, heavy sighs. Finally, he asked the question I had no good answer for. Did she ever explain why? I thought about Riley's words in that visitation room, her twisted logic about money and survival, her contempt for my steady, modest life. But none of it explained the betrayal, the theft from strangers, and worst of all, the theft from our own grandmother. She never gave me a real reason. I admitted softly when I mentioned Grandma's missing jewelry. Mom's heartbreak was palpable. Those pieces were meant to be yours and Riley's, she whispered. They were supposed to connect you to your history. And she sold them like they were nothing. We cried together that night, miles apart but united in grief. A few months later, Detective Marshall reached out about something unexpected. A restorative justice program. Some of the burglary victims had requested to meet with people connected to the crimes, not to blame but to express their pain and hopefully find some closure. At first, I resisted. The idea of facing the people Riley had hurt made me nauseous. I feared they'd see me as guilty by association. But in the end, I agreed. The first meeting was with an elderly couple. Their apartment had been broken into, and among the stolen items were family photographs and heirlooms. Sitting across from them, I braced myself for anger. Instead, the woman reached across the table and touched my hand. "We don't blame you," she said gently. "But we needed you to understand it wasn't just things that were taken. It was our sense of safety, our memories. That can't be replaced." Tears blurred my vision as I apologized, not for Riley's choices, but for the part one unknowingly played as her cover. To my surprise, sharing my own feelings of betrayal seemed to create a strange bond. They had been violated by strangers. I had been violated by family. Different kinds of pain, but pain nonetheless. Over the next few weeks, I met with other victims. Each conversation was raw, emotional, and healing in ways I hadn't expected. They helped me see the ripple effects of Riley's crimes, while also helping them see that families of offenders suffer too. Through it all, I began to rebuild. Slowly, cautiously, I let people back into my life. I attended networking events again. I volunteered at an animal shelter, where the unconditional affection of abandoned pets soothed wounds I hadn't realized were still bleeding. And then one day, a letter arrived from Riley. I recognized her handwriting instantly, sharp and familiar. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure of what I'd find. Part of me expected more excuses, more manipulation. But this letter was different. I never considered the people whose homes we entered as real people, she wrote. They were just symbols of what I wanted but couldn't have. I'm starting to see now how much damage I did, not just to them but to you, to Mom and Dad, to myself. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry for betraying you. For the first time, her words didn't feel like a con. They felt like the beginning of genuine remorse. I don't know what the future holds for us. Riley has pleaded guilty to reduced charges, and the prosecutor has recommended a 3-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 18 months. Logan, who played a bigger role, received 5 years. Whether our relationship can ever be rebuilt remains uncertain. But for the first time in months, I feel a flicker of cautious hope. This journey has taught me painful, powerful lessons. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, that trusting my instincts is survival, and that integrity sometimes means standing against those we love most. I've learned I am stronger than I ever realized. And though the wounds are still healing, I know one thing for certain. Riley's betrayal doesn't define me. My resilience does. Time has a strange way of moving after your world collapses. Some days felt endless, heavy with grief and anger, while others passed in a blur of work, therapy sessions, and cautious attempts to rebuild a normal life. By the 7th month after Riley's arrest, I had begun to find a rhythm again. Riley had pleaded guilty to reduced charges. The prosecutor recommended a 3-year sentence, with parole eligibility after 18 months. Logan, with his deeper involvement in organizing the burglaries and laundering stolen goods, received 5 years. When I first heard the sentences, I didn't know how to feel. Relief that justice had been served? Sadness that my sister's life had spiraled to this point? Both emotions lived side by side in me. Wrestling for dominance, I focused on what I could control: my own healing. Therapy continued to be a lifeline. I had stopped blaming myself for Riley's choices, but the guilt of being used as her cover still lingered. My therapist reminded me often, "Camila, you didn't choose this. Riley did." It took time, but I began to believe her. Work remained my anchor. My design business had grown to the point where I was turning away small projects and focusing on larger clients. Ironically, the very thing Riley mocked me for, my steady, predictable path, had become my salvation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, built honestly with my own effort. Still, there were scars. Trusting people didn't come easily. I kept colleagues and acquaintances at arm's length, hesitant to let anyone get too close. But I pushed myself little by little. Daniela invited me to a dinner party with her friends, and though I almost canceled 3 times, I forced myself to go. The laughter around the table, the warmth of strangers who quickly felt like friends. It reminded me that not everyone was hiding secrets. Some people really were what they seemed. Volunteering at the animal shelter also helped. The dogs didn't care about my past or my scars. They wagged their tails, leaned into my hands, and taught me that unconditional trust still existed in the world. Even if it was furry and 4-legged. One of the hardest steps was visiting our parents in Florida. I booked a flight after months of putting it off, terrified of the conversations we would have. When I walked into their modest home, Mom's arms wrapped around me instantly. She cried, and so did I. Dad, more reserved, simply placed a hand on my shoulder and gave it a squeeze. We talked late into the night. Mom asked if Riley had said anything to me, if there was any sign of remorse. I told them about the letter Riley had written, about how it felt different from her earlier manipulations. She admitted she hurt people, I said softly. She admitted she betrayed me. She didn't ask for forgiveness, but she said she was sorry. Tears filled Mom's eyes. I just don't understand how my little girl could go so far astray. None of us did. The visit was healing in its own way. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the burden alone. We were 3 people trying to make sense of Riley's choices, bound together not by answers, but by shared pain and love that still remained. Back in Seattle, I kept pushing forward. I reconnected with old friends I had pulled away from. I joined a networking group for graphic designers, not just to grow my business, but to force myself to trust again. Each interaction was a small step toward believing in people once more. The restorative justice meetings continued too. One particular session stuck with me. A woman in her 40s whose home had been broken into. She described lying awake at night afterward, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. They didn't just take jewelry, she said, her voice trembling. They took my peace of mind. I apologized, not on Riley's behalf, but for my unwitting role as her cover. I know what it feels like to have your trust shattered by someone close, I told her. To my surprise, she nodded. Then maybe you understand better than most. Those conversations didn't erase the pain, but they transformed it into something constructive. They reminded me that healing is possible, even when scars remained. As for Riley, I visited her a few times in prison. The first visits were tense, filled with blame and defensiveness. But over time, I began to see small changes. She enrolled in therapy programs offered at the facility. She started taking educational courses. One day, instead of lashing out or trying to manipulate me, she simply said, "I'm working on myself." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Then another letter arrived. This one was longer, more reflective. I never thought about the people whose homes we entered as real human beings with feelings. I saw them as faceless, wealthy strangers who wouldn't miss what I took. I know now that's not true. I hurt them. I hurt you. I hurt Mom and Dad. I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I want to try. For the first time, I let myself believe she might truly be changing, that I'm not naive anymore. I know remorse doesn't erase what she's done, and I don't know if our relationship can ever be what it once was. But I've learned that hope and boundaries can coexist. I can care about my sister without sacrificing my integrity again. 6 months ago, I thought her betrayal had broken me, but now I realize it reshaped me. I'm stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. I've learned that family ties don't excuse toxic behavior, that blood doesn't mean blind loyalty, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no, even to someone you love. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see the woman who was blindsided by her sister's lies. I see someone who faced betrayal head-on and chose truth over convenience, integrity over illusion. And maybe, just maybe, I see someone who is finally free. It's been nearly a year since everything fell apart. A year since I walked into my own bedroom and found strangers tearing it apart. A year since I watched my sister being led away in handcuffs. A year since I had to choose between blind loyalty and my own integrity. Looking back now, the strangest part is not the betrayal itself, but how much I've grown in its shadow. For so long I thought betrayal defined me, that my identity was tied to being the woman whose sister deceived her, whose home became a storage locker for stolen goods, whose trust was exploited for a criminal cover. But over these months I've realized something else. Betrayal doesn't define you. What you choose to do afterward does. The healing wasn't quick or easy. At first I isolated myself. I was afraid to let anyone close. If my own sister could lie so convincingly, how could I believe anyone else's words? I jumped every time my phone buzzed with a message. I scrutinized every casual smile, every invitation, searching for ulterior motives. But life has a way of pushing you forward, even when you want to stand still. Therapy became a place where I learned to stop punishing myself for Riley's decisions. Volunteering reminded me that trust, though fragile, still existed in the wagging tail of a dog or the purr of a rescued cat. Work reminded me that my steady, honest effort could still build something strong and lasting. Even visiting my parents in Florida, though painful, taught me that grief can bind people together just as much as joy can. We cried, we raged, we questioned. And slowly, we accepted that Riley's choices were hers alone, not the product of some failure in how we raised her or how we loved her. As for Riley, she remains in prison. She writes to me sometimes, and her letters feel different now. Less defensive, more reflective. She admits the harm she caused, not just to strangers but to me, to our family, to herself. I don't know what her future holds. I don't know if we can ever rebuild the closeness we once had. But I do know that her remorse is no longer another manipulation. It's a start, however fragile. For me, the lesson has been clear, even if painful. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes family ties aren't enough to excuse toxic behavior. And sometimes the greatest act of love, for yourself and even for the person who hurt you, is refusing to enable their destruction. I've learned that trusting my instincts is not paranoia. It's self-preservation. That setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. And that even when someone you love betrays you, you can survive, adapt, and grow stronger than before. 6 months ago, I sat across from Riley in that visitation room, listening to her beg me to lie for her. In that moment, I realized the line between us wasn't just a pane of glass. It was the boundary between who she had chosen to become and who I refused to be. I walked away then. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was also the moment I reclaimed my life. Now, when I tell this story, it's not because I want pity. It's because I want others to know they're not alone. Maybe your betrayal didn't come from a sibling. Maybe it came from a friend, a partner, a parent, or even a child. But betrayal has a way of cutting to the bone, leaving you doubting yourself as much as the person who hurt you. If that's where you are now, hear me. Their choices are not your fault. Trust is not a weakness. It is a gift you gave, and their betrayal says more about them than it ever could about you. I can't undo what Riley did. I can't bring back the stolen jewelry or erase the fear she created in strangers' homes. I can't give my parents back their peace of mind or erase the memories of my bedroom torn apart. But I can choose what comes next. I can choose honesty over deception. I can choose healing over bitterness. I can choose to let betrayal shape me, but not define me. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest growth. So now I ask you, have you ever had to choose between loyalty to someone you love and staying true to your own values? What did you do? Did you walk away? Or did you try to hold on? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal but also the strength of resilience, please hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge Amy. Here we share real stories of betrayal, resilience, and yes, sweet revenge, not always the kind that comes with dramatic gestures, but the quiet, powerful revenge of choosing yourself, your integrity, and your future. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, trust should be given carefully, but when it's broken, it doesn't mean you're broken too. You can rise, rebuild, and become stronger than ever. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't anger or retribution, it's living a life that's still yours, unshaken and true. Thank you for following this story till the end. If you found this an emotional journey of betrayal, justice, and inner strength, please help Revenge Amy reach its first 1,000 subscribers. Just a like and subscribe. Your support will be a great motivation for us to continue bringing more inspiring stories. Click subscribe today and be a part of this journey. See you in the next stories.